Welcome to the Fire These Times, a podcast dedicated to the easy task of tackling the 21st century from the periphery. I'm your host, Jure Ayub, and my goal is to use this platform to connect with activists, scholars, writers, and other weird folks from around the world to link our stories and interests up. Join me as we get into all sorts of futurisms, from solar punk to degrowth, as we explore meaningful ways of creating links between the peoples on the periphery, and as we explore various topics from tech to anti-authoritarian politics, feminism, abolitionism, decolonialism, anti-racism, and all the other fun isms in between. This podcast is ad-free and accessible to everyone thanks to the generous donations of Patreon supporters on patreon.com/firethesetimes. For as little as $5 a month or $50 a year, you can help keep this podcast independent that way. If you're a student, unemployed, or in any kind of financial difficulties, you can support with $2 a month or $20 a year. There are also other methods such as on PayPal or buymeacoffee.com, and you can find the relevant links in the description below or on the website. My goal is to make this project financially sustainable so that I can work on producing valuable content on a regular basis, such as this podcast, the newsletter, my essays, various online resources, and hopefully eventually YouTube essays as well. And if you like the content of this podcast, you can also check out the newsletter. In that newsletter, which I release on a quasi-monthly basis, I reflect on some of the topics discussed on this podcast and try to take them a bit further. The newsletter is free and you can get it by simply subscribing directly on the website. The Fire These Times is named after the James Baldwin book The Fire Next Time, and the music is by Ibrahim Yusuf. Thank you for listening and take care. Hey everyone, so this is a conversation with Cindy Milstein. She's the editor of the book There's Nothing So Whole as a Broken Heart, Mending the World as Jewish Anarchists. I wanted to have Cindy on to talk about what I feel was a diaspora to diaspora conversation. So in this conversation, I kind of made it a point not to bring up either Israel or Zionism. We do make references to states and we make references to nationalism and anti-nationalism, but I wanted this to be a conversation that at least goes against the tendency of always expecting a conversation between radicals that involve a Jewish person to be about Israel and or Zionism. I actually think this is a very toxic tendency and I wanted to avoid that. That being said, we spoke about displacement as part of the Jewish experience, being diaspora, herself Jewish, myself Arab. We spoke about having communities and the importance of communities without states and beyond states. I talked a bit about my own background as someone who studies the politics of language, specifically Hebrew and Yiddish. We also spoke about Ladino and all of those things that if you don't know about, well, this would be a good episode to become familiar with. We got into authoritarianism and the tendency within authoritarianism to flatten all differences and diversity. Cindy obviously spoke about Jewish anarchism and specifically queer Jewish anarchism and how she cherishes these movements. And as with every episode, we also kind of went all over the place. We spoke about hegemonic narratives in Europe. I gave examples of the Dreyfus affair, of Alsace, of Berlin, of Spain. She spoke about the importance of oral histories. She explained what Tisha B'av is, the importance of the year 1492, the recent Tree of Life massacre of a few years ago, and the importance of needing a language for grief. I asked her about what it's like to wrestle with difficulties as an inherent trait of radical Judaism. And finally, we also had a conversation about antisemitism on the right and, of course, on the left as well. So, as you might guess, this is a pretty broad conversation. I really think you will find this one interesting. And as always, I look forward to hearing from you. Send me your reviews, your comments, your critiques, all of that stuff, either on Patreon or by email, which you can find on the website. Thank you for listening, folks, and take care.
My name is Cindy Milstein, and I am a queer Jewish anarchist human being, and I write and organize, and like a lot of people are coping with like the collective trauma of this moment.
We'll primarily be kind of focusing on a book that you edited and contributed to as well, which is called There's Nothing So Whole as a Broken Heart, Mending the World as Jewish Anarchists, which came out last year, I believe. And it's a fantastic book with like dozens of different contribution essays and other kinds of formats as well. Can you kind of start us off with talking a bit about it, like what is sort of its background, how did it come into being, and so on?
Yeah, sure. And first, I want to also really thank you for this conversation. It's really a pleasure to be here with you. I've realized I love curating and editing anthologies from concept to finish, and because I feel like they're these beautiful containers for bringing together multiple voices in conversation with each other. And I try really hard to do that. I have like sort of strong themes I want to bring out, but I'll really like voices that aren't all in agreement around those themes. So in the case of this one, it came from back in the days before the pandemic. I tend to go to a lot of different places. I hope I can again, go to a lot of different places to do different talks with other books I've done, or just hold space for all sorts of conversations. And I was noticing that, wow, a lot of places I went, suddenly I seemed to be staying with not just anarchists, but Jewish anarchists. And I was just experiencing firsthand this incredible resurgence of Jewish anarchism, which has had a long and wonderful tradition within anarchism. But it was noticeably different in the sense that it spoke to me in a way that it hadn't before, because it was also very feminist and queer and trans, and trying to kind of do something different with Jewish anarchism than I'd done in the past. So I was like, oh, this is curious. And when I get curious about things, and I was really personally and politically enthused about it, I decided to do this collection of stories, including because I wanted to read them. So yeah, that's sort of how it came about. Yeah. And also I think my own, for me, I guess it really struck me. If I organized an anarchist summer school, which had to be delayed because of the pandemic. But the last summer of it, there was a group of us who happened to be both Jewish and anarchist, and we actually sort of circled up at one point. We're having a conversation, and it really struck me. One of the folks who actually has a piece in the book just said, wow, the pain they experience is they can't be a Jew in anarchist spaces, and they can't be an anarchist in Jewish spaces, and that was something they wanted to bring the whole of themselves together. And I realized, coming in to a lot more contact with this sort of resurgent Jewish anarchism, I really did feel whole, and I watched other people feeling more whole through that. And yeah, so the last thing I want to say is I just realized during this pandemic time, I've just been so grateful for that space being created. There's just an incredible flowering of Jewish anarchist and anarchistic projects and spaces, but that's been held really beautifully through the pandemic, precisely to help us all get through it. And as a lot of us have been saying, well, we're kind of used to this. We have a long, thousands of years history of figuring out how to survive moments like this, or try to, and how to not just survive, but find life in moments like this. So I really sort of feel like Jewish anarchism, in a sense, like saved and sustained my life during the pandemic. And I know it's done that for a lot of others, and allowed us to honor the grief and the death that's happened during this time period.
Yeah, I definitely got that feeling while reading the book. And there's the emphasis, I mean, it's in the subtitle of the book as well, like mending the words, like it's recognizing the existing pains and suffering and challenges and struggles, obviously, but also sort of kind of echoing the fact that we have been through this before, if not exactly in the same way, of course, but there have been moments in which it has really felt like this is the end, or this is other than literally previous pandemics, of course, like the one of about a century ago, just in terms of like hardships that really feel overwhelming. I guess I could put it that way. And I one thing that really attracted me to this book, I'm not Jewish, I'm of like Lebanese, Palestinian origins and other heritages as well. But I do have this history in my family of displacement, and this is something that I can really trace it back roughly to the 1800s, because we don't have much documentation before that. And it's the reason why I have Italian and Argentinian ancestry, for example, and obviously with the Palestinian after 48, it's also a part of that story. And I wanted to ask you, if it's okay to kind of talk to us a bit about the role of displacement and how this is sort of an inherent component. I don't know if I could put it that way, but correct me if it's wrong. But an inherent component of the Jewish experience, broadly speaking, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yes. Totally. And as you just pointed out, your and many other people's experience, which is why I think that category of displacement, or like in the book, I also talk a lot about diaspora, which is a form of displacement. Is so resonant with so many of us and formative. I almost think within Judaism, both like historically and written works and sort of self-identity and culturally on pretty much on every level. This notion of being displaced, I think, is inseparable. Many of the stories we tell and we talk about or the holidays revolve around that sense of being displaced. And for myself, I always talk about it sort of, I never feel at home in this world. And I think that's why I want to change the world. But in Judaism, there's this really incredible concept, which we practice each week in a sense on Shabbat. And this is a Shemitah year, which is every 7 years. You're supposed to forgive debts and let the land rest and a whole bunch of other really egalitarian notions of, but it's considered the Shabbat of Shabbat every 7 years. And what you're supposed to do during that time is experiment with the world to come. What does it mean to step away from capitalism and colonialism and all the other things that don't let us feel whole in this world? And but part of that is a story. And I don't know, there's this really, whether it's historically accurate or not, but it speaks to me as a diasporic person. And kind of one of the stories within Judaism, which we retell a lot, is, being thrown into exile for, and a long time and being forced to wander. But the first thing that happens is, whether I'm not someone who believes in God, but in the story, you're given this kind of sacred space that's a temporary structure that creates a space for community and remembering who we are and sharing stories and feeling the sacredness of connection. And we pick that up and move it every time we continue to forward. But that story, even in the religious text, ends before we ever reach that place of freedom, that place of the world to come. And I don't know that we as an anarchist, we never will reach this place, right? I understand that we're always in search of it. So that double-edgedness of displacement, where it's the most brutal, horrible hardship and trauma, which I'm sure you also feel. I can't trace my family back much farther than you. And I have no idea. I know from reading histories of Jews that I probably don't even come from where, I don't even know where it comes from, We Jews have been displaced so many times, I could come from nowhere and everywhere, right? But I think that transgenerational trauma is carried in our bodies, in our culture, in our stories, and how we, foods we eat, traditional strategies of resistance and mourning. But it's not just a trauma, though. It's also been a sense, a powerful force to, crossing. It's been generative, right? Those things are so inseparable from each other, and I think that's why the title of the book, There's Nothing So Whole as a Broken Heart. It's there's a sense of we've all been scattered and displaced and broken and pulled apart so many times. And we want to feel the sense of wholeness, but that wholeness, in a sense, only comes by bringing all those parts of ourselves with us, right? So you just named all those different parts of yourself, and I'm sure there's many more. And those parts aren't just trauma, right? They bring something uniquely beautiful together in you, right?
Yeah.
And when various ones of us, end up displaced in the same place for a while, we end up creating beautiful, different generative ways of understanding the world. So it's both the heartbreak and the beauty, I think, of displacement. Unfortunately, right now, I don't know if I'm not good at statistics, but from everything I've read, this is a moment of the greatest displacement of the most people ever in human history, in terms of numbers. And more people are somewhere they don't want to be. And so the pain of displacement right now is profound, right? It's it's a different thing to choose to move between spaces and another thing to be forced by, capitalist fueled climate catastrophes, economics, violence, gentrification, colonization. We could go on and on. So, so I don't want to make light and as in this anthology, or I just, in many of us as human beings right now, trying to hold both the grief and the generativeness and the beauty of that at the same time. It's I think that's the task.
It definitely made me think of that quote that you yourself use in the introduction, I think, by an anarchist, a Greek anarchist friend of yours called Paparuna, I believe, who explained the term diaspora this way. I have it in front of me. to disperse, most likely from the act of spreading seeds across both space and time. It is a scattering apart and also a seeding of man, places, and moments. It holds pain, loss, and separation, but hope, growth, but also but also growth and nurturance as well. I think I butchered that quote, but that's the gist of it. Yeah, it's something that I think about a lot, as I mentioned, like from my own history, but also my present, like just moving so many times in the past few years, largely to like the official story is to follow an academic route, but in practice it was just seeking visas and residencies and that sort of thing, because one has to be realistic about these things. I wanted to kind of also in the introduction of the book, and you did mention it a bit, but if it's okay to sort of expand on that, that you do say that you do write that you aspire, or that this book aspires to speak to all diasporic peoples in hopes that we can remember how much we share. Can you sort of talk a bit more about that?
Yeah. I think one thing like for me, I don't know if this speaks to other diasporic peoples, but I think I think it does. I don't want to assume that. But what it shows, like for me, within the Jewish world, for thousands of for thousands of years, that most Jews have lived in diaspora, and still probably the vast majority do. And it's a very recent thing that there was any kind of sense of a state related to Jews, which I think was a wrong turn. But what that has shown to me is that it's possible to have community without states, without borders, across the globe, and held together, or a community held together in diaspora by things that we self-determine and we voluntarily, both see as our responsibility and something we want to do, and something we shift and change and becomes dynamic over time to the different contexts. And I know pretty much, diasporic people are, I think all, in a sense, many of us share the same thing of like, we want to keep a sense of who we are together, whether that's, foods or culture or language. Or in Judaism, there's, which I can't speak for other traditions, but, there's between whether you understand it as Jewish law or Jewish traditions or Jewish rituals, there's many practices for thousands of years have kept people bound together, again, without need for like a status set of rules, right? Or police, or all these other structures that, control and destroy us. So on the one hand, I think that's one way we share, that we all are living examples of it's possible to have a sense of belonging and care and mutualistic obligation, etc., solidarity without states and borders.
Yeah, and so some background. I did my master's, like the thesis, in 2016 in London, and it was on the politics of Yiddish and Hebrew, and it was a very, because I grew up in Lebanon, right? So not exactly the two most spoken languages in Lebanon, but it's a very odd, I don't know, a curious turn of events of how that came about, and I don't know if I've ever fully told that story, so I'll just say it now. I wanted to do something related to Lebanon. Language in Lebanon was sort of what I was going for. And there's an interesting thing to be done about language politics, and by language politics I just mean like how language is perceived, how it's conceptualized, the role of Arabic in Lebanon, for example, that sort of thing. But I also I had just left to do my studies, and I needed some separation, or some distance from Lebanon for some time. And I was in this library at SOAS at University of London, and they have a sizable collection of, I don't remember what they called it, but probably like Jewish studies, and yeah, I think that's what they called it. I was flickering through some of the books, and I found one of what would end up being one of the many books that I ended up using in the thesis, which was on this history of Yiddish. And that immediately clicked with me. As far as I know, I have no direct familial connection. But there was something in that story that really spoke to me, and it's the story of being kind of spread around Eastern Europe primarily, but also Central Europe, and having something that connects peoples that are otherwise very different, which is this language. And I'm kind of simplifying, obviously, but this was one thing. And it ended up becoming, because I needed to justify how about writing a thesis, it ended up becoming a comparative thing between the history of Yiddish and the history of Hebrew with a focus on the 20th century. And obviously the politics of, we might say like nationalism versus quote-unquote diasporism is the term that I saw used. And it's in that context that I came across the term Doikait, which is, for those who don't know, like here-ness, as in here, H-E-R-E-ness. I think that's one of the translations. This is probably a better one. But and there was this poster which I ended up printing and having above me when I was writing my PhD, actually the first couple of years when I was in Scotland, which says in Yiddish, and this is the English translation, wherever we all live, that is our homeland. And so I have more thoughts on this, but I was wondering if you can kind of give us some sense from the book, because I don't know if it's in your own personal family history, so if it is, feel free to mention that. But I know that in the book there was quite a lot of talk of like, Yiddish and Ladino, this other Jewish language, and sort of their importance as being more than just languages, as having this actual symbolic, I guess, I don't know, but a sort of weight behind them, if that makes sense.
That totally does. Yeah, what a great thing you wrote on. Yeah, no, the politics of language is like, clearly, right at this moment when there's been a lot of resurgence of questioning white supremacy, and I would actually say white Christian, often male supremacy, and how the history of that has stolen, dispossessed, and displaced so many peoples, and that includes their languages, right? And so there's a lot of emphasis, not just among Jews, but others of, or Jewish radicals. That's the circles I'm in. Of understanding that like it's one of the weapons of unassimilating and decolonizing and defying a lot of the things that have tried to destroy us is language, is to relearn languages, and languages shape how we see the world, right, and how we understand. And so Yiddish, for example, I unfortunately do not speak it. My father did, and started trying to teach me when I was young, but the trauma of my grandmother's trauma led her to use Yiddish to just scream at him constantly from when he was a young child till she died. And so for me, that was a language of them screaming at each other. But now I really wish I had. But what I appreciate about Yiddish, whether it's translated into sort of the culture that I grew up in and others, is that, for instance, the language includes a lot of sort of joking at our own sort of expense or at our troubles, right? And so that's the coping strategy of a lot of diaspora peoples, is turn sort of hardship into jokes. But Yiddish also has, like, for now, this has really been striking me now during a pandemic, when people go, "Hey, how are you?" And everyone's like, perfunctory responses, "Oh, good," or "Okay," or whatever. I'm in the so-called United States right now, so this kind of really ridiculous falseness that people have about greetings. But in Yiddish, there's so many ways to basically say, I'm not really doing that well. But if you don't know, you don't understand the context, you wouldn't get the kind of humor in it. But I think, there's dozens of ways to say that in Yiddish, right? Little subtleties of how you're not doing well. And so I'm thinking, like, to revive language, to come back to your bigger point, it's to reclaim meaning, to reclaim culture. But it also, is a way to reclaim when we want to be seen and see each other, and when we don't want to be seen. And one of the pieces in the anthology, for instance, talks about someone who has painted some banners in Yiddish and brought them to demonstrations that are anti-fascist. And they talk about how, it allows Jews to read them and who they're with as Jewish and join them and meet them. And it allows fascists to understand that they're Jews and that they're dangerous to them and they're there to oppose them. But the fascists and the state and others can't read the Yiddish. So we're sort of legible and not legible at the same time. And how do we play with that tension of like, who do we want to be legible to each other, but not to like, citizenship or passports or all these other things. So I think to come back to this language, to kind of tie language and diaspora and some of this together, there's so much more we could keep talking about of like the sort of solidarities is like, how did we have codes and understanding and ways? I'm queer. Queers have done this for a long time. It's like, how do we know who we are, right? And so part of that is these ways we signal to each other. And diasporic peoples have often had really remarkable similar ways of signaling to each other where they are or who they are or where they can protect each other. Whether that's forms of like, I touch on this in the book, for instance, like forms of, when you're a diasporic people, how do you make noise to call each other together again, right? There's remarkably similar ways people have done that, or, making space feel safe again, etc. And language is in a sense a part of that. It's a part of us being able to, be there for each other in a way that is different. But I think within Judaism, especially, this is true, this was so true. Language, like everything else, has become so homogenized, right? And there were thousands of languages. And so Jews have spoken so many different languages. There are Jews of all different colors and shapes and sizes and regions and practices. And, to sort of come back to the beautifulness of diaspora is seeds that are scattered. The seeds of Judaism are all different types of varieties, right? And they've blossomed all sorts of different languages and traditions, etc. And yet there's still this shared sense of, when you meet another Jew, you still have a shared sense of, you do Shabbat too, I do too. How do you do it? What do you do on that? What do you, and part of that is what language, what words do you use, right? Or what do you say, or what do you eat, or right? And so how do we do that? I think these spaces where we open up space to understand, hey, we do these things differently, but there's something that's held us together, and I don't think that's limited just to some boundary of Judaism, right? I find a lot of recognition in people who understand themselves as also not even, having lost a lot, culture and languages when we share. For instance, I will use another example. For a lot of huge percentages of diasporic people before they were colonized used calendars that related to the natural world, or marked time, or maybe not even time, and different concepts of how life felt, right? Maybe it wasn't even linear, used the sun and the moon and the ecosystem to understand the cycles of life and with their role in it and their relationship to it and their embeddedness to it, right? And that goes across pretty much all diasporic cultures. And then you have empires and popes and colonizers coming and going, no, we're going to unify and consolidate and impose a calendar upon the world. And that world is the calendar of the time of, capitalism and colonialism and, a dominant religion that wants to crush most of us. And so all of us coming back to our calendars, during the pandemic, I've spent like more and more drawn to the Jewish calendar and how we understand, which always starts at twilight. And so, for instance, how you know that the end of Shabbat happens is you can look up to the sky when you first, or other holidays that start at other times that start at twilight, is you look up and when you see the first 3 stars, it's time to move into the next, and that's such a beautiful, different way. But you think about the Jewish New Year, there are actually 4, but the main Jewish New Year, I started looking into the calendar time of that, and almost all the major sort of diasporic, non-sort of hegemonic traditions have New Year's at all different times based upon the moon or the sun. Right? That's a profoundly different way of understanding the world, right? A different language, if you want to, I would say. I want to just draw this last point out. It's like a different language, right? We have a language that makes us much more in a part of the natural world of which we are part of that world, right? And now humans are so disconnected to it when we have a calendar that has no relationship to other cycles, right? And when we look at other cycles, we understand that diaspora isn't, being diasporic isn't some aberration. It's what humans and animals and seeds and plants and the moon and the sun and the stars, everything is constantly in motion. And constantly moving, and then comes back again, or converges, or finds places of overlap. But to stay still is actually counter, sort of, to who we are. humanity, we move to be with each other. We move to, engage with our environments and hopefully live in harmony with them. And, all these other structures that have stolen things from us, including our very voices, to be able to articulate that, have to be, to me, undone.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that. I was thinking of the Ladino, which for those who don't know, is like Judeo-Spanish would be another way of calling it. It's the language of those who were expelled, forcibly displaced, and ethnically cleansed in 1492 in what is now Spain. And there are still, of course, speakers of Ladino, and I would go down these rabbit holes on YouTube, like wiki tongues and other sort of thing, and there are lots of lovely lullabies in Ladino for those who want to check them out on YouTube. And I speak Spanish, so I understand most of it, but I would always be very curious, when I don't, what are these words that I don't, and sometimes they're Hebrew words, but sometimes they're words taken from the other languages that those displaced Jewish peoples were, they went to what is now Greece, to what is now Turkey, what's now the Balkans as well, all of those places. And obviously the language would adapt depending on the context. So there isn't even technically just one Ladino. There's just one main one dialect that sort of most can understand it. But yeah, it has adapted. It has taken from all of these different places, and yet it's still this one thing. It hasn't lost itself in that sense. It hasn't been, I don't know what's the term yet, but it hasn't lost itself in those other languages. It was still its own language, and it still is its own language. And at some point, Ladino was actually one of the lingua franca of the Mediterranean for quite a few, for 2-3 centuries. I forgot which centuries exactly, but I would guess 16th and 17th century would be included in those. And so you did have merchants, from what is now Turkey going to what is now Greece or elsewhere, and speaking to one another in Ladino, even if they were themselves not Jewish. And this is one of those things that I had no idea that Ladino existed, in the same way that I had no idea that there was such a thing as Judeo-Arabic, which is more of a family of languages. It's not just one thing with different dialects and so on, which again also reflected there's a very specific Judeo-Arabic from Baghdad and a very specific Judeo-Arabic from elsewhere, that sort of thing. Those histories, for the most part, of course, there is documentation, and there are people who, whose scholarship is around these, but they're no longer part of this mainstream. I don't know if I should say global conversation. I guess I don't know. It's a bad way of putting it. But another example I can give is when I was doing this master's. So when I was doing politics of Yiddish specifically, I came across a number of accounts of people who, because there were kind of these debates, although they were never live or anything like that, but there were lots of different correspondences and in different journals and different places of the world saying we should use Yiddish or saying we should use Hebrew. It's never this explicit, but it's kind of like the general argument. And one of those who were opposed to Yiddish, and that would have been in their 50s, so it's not even that long ago, post-Holocaust obviously, described Yiddish, no 60s, sorry, described Yiddish as the language of the dead and of those in retirement homes or something like that. Some really, really horrible way of putting it. And that quote, and I can find I'm paraphrasing, so it's not 100% accurate, but that kind of stayed with me while I was doing this, because in those debates, and often, as I said, they were pretty heated, there were pretty horrible stuff said, the sort of stuff that you wouldn't hear, or you wouldn't think you would hear said from one Jewish person to the other, but it was a very, very heated and aggressive and very demeaning type of language was used. And there are even more horrible things, but I don't want to mention them here. And this was just about language. This wasn't no one was debating in those things. They weren't really debating communism versus capitalism versus nationalism. That wasn't. It was just literally, should we speak this language or should we not? And in the 40s and 50s, you had these I forgot what they called them. So it was these battalions. One of the groups was called a battalion, kind of enforcing the language of Hebrew, because there were so many people who spoke all of these other languages. And it's one of those things that one wonders, and I guess this is the question I'll ask you. Why do you think, and it's not just about language, but it's just what I'm thinking of now, but what do you think it is about this, like this multiplicity, right? Like multiple languages, multiple ethnicities, multiple origins, what have you, that is always under threat. Like there's always an authoritarian force. And I'm being very vague here, but like a state or a fascist movement or what have you, that always seeks to want, like almost deeply desire, flattening all of those differences or that diversity in the name of this one ideal or whatnot. And obviously we're having this conversation in early 2022. We've been seeing this, especially in the past few years, develop as well, right? So I'm just wondering about if you have some thoughts while I feel like I spoke a lot.
Oh no, you didn't know. This is great. I'm really appreciative of you. I've talked about this book before. No one's really picked up on the language. I really like one reason I like this anthology. I think it's very Jewish in structure, where it's like there's a lot of different parts to it. But
yeah.
I don't know. Whenever I'm around, I don't know, not just Jew, but there's a particular way, but it's structured to how like Jewish sort of study and thought is, as you kind of like bounce around between multiple ideas, even like the structure of a page of how you study. If you were to study, religious text has the original, and then it's surrounded by other opinions on the same page. So it's like, I feel so anyway, different people pick up on other things. I really appreciate you picking up on the language part. I like having different threads that people grab. Yeah, no, I think exactly what you said. It's like anything that challenges, authoritarian structures need to be able to control everything, and to control things, you need to like categorize it and, document and dominate. You need to, and I copy edit books for a living, freelance, and they're not always what I would necessarily read, but I did one recently which really was provoking. Was a history of about 100 years ago of a Jew who had died in Tunisia, but he was Tunisian Jew. He was born in Tunisia, but had lived in other places, France, Italy, etc., and also was pretty religiously Jewish, so had Jewish law. So the whole book was about the debate about like, how do you decide what to do with this person's, the leftover estate of this person. And the reason I bring that up is because it was only 100 years ago, and I was reminded. I just finished that, and I was reminded yet again, like only 100 years ago, most people didn't have passports. Most people, their names changed when they wanted them. They had various different names. They moved between places when one place got, dangerous or uncomfortable, or for just, because they felt like they wanted to, or, and belonging was something related to so many other different things, including languages. And this book also talked about, the kind of overlap, because it mentioned Tunisia, between Muslims and Jews, and the different languages and the sort of ways people could speak to each other, and sometimes good relations, sometimes not great, etc. But they lived aside, they lived in similar spaces, and then then we have the rise of like Tunisia gets colonized, or other things happen, and this and then we have moving up to Nazism, fascism and Nazism sweeping Europe and the globe, and this profound imposition of, okay, we need forms of citizenship. We need documentation. We need to know who you are. We need to be able to control you. And language is part of that, right? The erasure of supposedly languages that are archaic or backward or peasant-like or unrefined, and so much, anti-Semitism was built into, even among Jews, right? Into crushing which languages were seen as more cultured or more, progressive, or all these other notions. But also, way beyond, person to person kind of differences is it, nation states need to have a sense of we are all one people. And to create that, they create artificial borders or flags or things like languages, right? And enforce those, because otherwise, what is the nation? It's really nothing other than a set of imposed, structures of control. And it isn't just nothing. Obviously, it's very violent. And states in general are not. I am not opposed to. I'm opposed to states in general. So I think what to go to the beautiful parts of why, what is subversive to states and other people that want to control is that people feel a sense of belonging. So you would know this better than I, because you've studied Yiddish far more than I have. But it always pains me when people just go kind of, Europeans are the problem, or everyone that speaks Yiddish is the same. There's such a flattening out of history, right? There's plenty of rebels, indigenous peoples, rebels, dissidents, heretics, struggles within Europe, right? It isn't a seamless place, and different forces won out. But Yiddish itself wasn't, right? And so when people have different languages that change by how they travel or by regions, as people can recognize different dialects or pick up on different words and communicate across languages, or it's so much more incredible in terms of it gives one a sense of belonging and a sense of place and a sense of home, that here-ness. You were talking about that Doikite, when, your Yiddish or your Ladino or all sorts of other variations of languages have within them both a sense of where a place and a sense of your travels at the same time, right? A sense of what you brought into it. None of us are pure people, right? Fascism, authoritarianism and fascism, it works by essentializing identities, trying to create pure identities. And, what to me, part of the political project as both a Jew and an anarchist and a queer, is that none of us fit in those pure identities. We're all these beautiful, incredible, generative convergences of a whole bunch of different threads that we draw out to create forms of collective care and solidarity and mutual aid and reciprocity and consent, right? And the way to impose, I don't know, I really even think about names a lot because I don't like my first name. For instance, I hate my first name, Cindy, and I keep playing with different names. It was a choice my parents made right after I was born. They were going to give me a Jewish sounding name, and then my dad especially was from his own trauma, etc., was concerned I would be I would face a lot of anti-Semitism if I had a name that sounded too Jewish. Although Milstein, kept the name that is Jewish and also was proudly Jewish. So it was one of those kind of contradictions of which I think a lot of people experience again from going through, the trauma as different other people, is you both are seeking security and safety and to protect each other. And you also want to be proud of who you are. And those two things are often in tension with each other, right? And so how does language work? And it took a name that I was going to get and gave me another one. And so I'm playing around with but then I look back in history, and for most of history, people did not have one name. They had different names at different moments in their life when they transitioned to something special in their life or some life change. They had affectionate names, by different people in their life. They had different names that related to their relationship to different people that made it clear what their relationship was, or maybe playfully unclear, names of people when they didn't like it. But we were not this, we were a full person who was understood differently by how language named us, depending on our social relationship with other people and spaces and places. And what a horrible way to contain, so you want to contain and control people is cut off their social relationships and force them to have a name, right? Which is on a passport and on this thing called citizenship, which is by and large not been a friend to most people, right? I do not think, I'm thinking a lot about this, the fight, for Black, I've been really influenced of late reading a lot by Black anarchists, that, Black people have never been considered part of citizenship or the state in the so-called United States. And the fight should not be to be part of something that will never not be anti-Black, or racist in general, white supremacist in general, but to figure out other forms of social relationships, right? And partially that's through language, through reconnection, and so many other ways, obviously, right? But how we speak, feel free to interrupt. Just randomly. I just think there's there's just so many elements to language. I just think is so fascinating. I mean, I guess the last thing I'll say about Yiddish, which there's so many. I wish I was better at languages. I would love to be learning. There's this huge, profound trying to relearn languages within this sort of revised Jewish anarchism, and including a lot of times when people create spaces for ritual or political organizing and stuff, this interest in bringing in multiple ways of saying things. So people have been doing a lot more. For instance, Hanukkah just happened a little recently, and there was so much more in a beautiful and playful and loving way of sharing. I think there's 50, 60 different ways to say and spell Hanukkah. And so people were trying to name all those ways or bring a bunch of them in, and I was like, wow, this is the first time I've seen such a beautiful, we're taking back this joy that here's a festival of light and resistance and a whole bunch of other understandings of it that we're taking back, and we're taking back all the different ways of saying it. But for me with Yiddish, one thing I really appreciated is like the Jewish anarchists were hugely influential to the beginnings of what is understood as anarchism, a big strain within that, and were long a big part of that. Some of the prominent names people think of when they think of anarchists are Jewish anarchists, and most of them, a lot of them used Yiddish, and especially those that emigrated to the United States or were in the United States for a while. And the largest and longest lasting anarchist newspaper, it was Freie Arbeiter Stimme, which is a Jewish Yiddish anarchist newspaper. But there's one reason people want to learn Yiddish is there's an enormous body of literature that's anarchist. So for people in my world, and radical and socialists and communists, is all the Jewish radicals, not all, a good percentage of them, that was the language they wrote and spoke and organized and agitated in. And so that history, even to find that history again, one needs that language so that history doesn't get lost. And that histories of resistance, whether it's anarchist or other histories from below of what I understand to be libertarian or anti-authoritarian histories of struggle and resistance, so many of them will be lost to history if we don't actually return to languages and be able to read them again, right? So many practices of self-governance, self-determination, self-organization, people spoke of them or sang of them, or, there's a whole bunch of songs, again, people are reclaiming in Yiddish and other languages that Jews used. 150 or so years ago, there were anti-cop, right? Anti-czar, anti-this, anti-that, right? Of hierarchical structures. And so to come back to those languages, you come back to practices of resistance and practices of struggle that have a lot to say for the present.
Yeah, what you were talking at. I'm going to put some of those songs that I remember I was listening to while doing that thesis, and there's a lot of them on YouTube.
Great!
Both Ladino and Yiddish. So I'll put those in the description.
Are Ladino sort of anti-police songs?
No, I think the ones I found were all like lullabies.
Okay.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
Lullabies are beautiful.
Yeah. But like, I also thought of this one example that I always give because you mentioned this whole like even European history isn't flat and it's actually more complicated, and how it actually I do genuinely believe that it benefits like the authoritarians, and I'm using a wide umbrella here, like capitalists and the right wing and all of that stuff. It benefits them to sort of portray Europe as this monolithic entity. And one of the good examples of that is the Dreyfus affair, which obviously is sort of infamous, and many people already know about it. I'll just briefly say that this was it's called the Dreyfus affair because Alfred Dreyfus, he was this French officer, he was of Jewish origins, and he was falsely accused of spying for the Germans. And it was an entire thing. It lasted for like years and years, I think over a decade even. And in the end, he was acquitted because he hadn't been the spy. He wasn't actually the spy. It was someone else. But the story, so many people would know this element, and they would, of course, think of anti-Semitism, which it was, and that was a huge part of the story. But another element of that story is that Dreyfus was from Alsace. And Alsace is this region which is now in France, but which for like 300 years changed hands from Germany, like from the Germans to the French, essentially, the States. And that's why the main city is Strasbourg in French, which obviously sounds German, Strasbourg, you might say it in German. But it was those things that you have also as a science, as a language, but in the process of forming the respective states, though a space like that one, which was sort of liminal, you might say, which was in between two giants, essentially two political giants, had its own language, but also many people who speak French and or German or both at the same time and so on, wasn't really allowed to exist as we know it, or as it would have known, if you want, if there wasn't this obsession to, on the part of the German state, to everyone has to speak German, or in the part of the French state where like everyone has to speak French. And so this was the nation states were largely formed around, or at least those in Europe, but it's a global story as well, where they were largely found around this concept of a language. Like, this is what we are. We're not French because we speak German, and that's basically the only definition of a German at the time.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
And,
no, it's really intense. I for years ago, I lived in Berlin for a couple years. Not happily. It was very difficult, but yeah, I was so struck by. I'm really not good at languages, but was trying to learn German the whole time, and the intense antagonism. Like, nobody pretty much universally Germans would not want to converse with me because they would always go, your German isn't good. It isn't our German, and I was just so struck by, I don't know. I mean, it's just touching on like this intense, like, language isn't just language. It's like this defining thing of who's in and who's out. I mean, it was a place too where every day it was so everyone understood me as Jewish, which was an odd experience I had never had before. And so I don't know, it's just an intense thing where language, you're totally right. And it's really sad in a way. I mean, I just feel like so much of even what is understood as Europe was multiple different regions, which had vastly different self-identities, and senses of belonging and things that people felt, proud of in a non-nationalistic, non-essentialist way, a more liberatory way that's been destroyed, right? And I wish we would talk more about, I know you mentioned 1492, I used that date in the anthology, and but there's many other dates we could have, but that date has really struck me in particular. And since then I've read a little bit more about things like, the Papal State or the Inquisition or things like that, how much, that consolidation of Catholicism, including into a state, which exists to this day, destroyed millions and millions of people's lives and cultures. And I think we think of 1490, Columbus also gets flattened down to who that pivotal moment gets flattened down. And I think it's intentional that it does in a way. It's helpful for colonizers and states and, authoritarians, et cetera, to flatten out the history, because it was a moment when, the rise of nation states and capitalism was targeting Jews and Muslims and indigenous people and Black people and women and queers and anyone that was seen as other to that project of consolidating, what has turned into a white supremacist, very Catholic or Christian, patriarchal and heteronormative, sorry to add a bunch of words, project, right? But that moment is this incredible intersection, that time period, between massive amounts of witch hunts were happening, which were killing women, queers, and also a lot of the ways we understand what witches look like came from anti-Semitic tropes, which is a whole nother tangent. So it was a very anti-Semitic time period. There was the Inquisition, which was, compelling Jews and others, Muslims, to either, assimilate, die, or leave. Clearly, the ships heading out to colonize different parts of the world and kill off indigenous peoples, and the slave trade happening, and all those things are happening at a really similar time period. And I stumbled across this, whether it's myth or truth, but the last day of the last day that Jews had to decide whether to, assimilate and abandon being Jewish, or, be displaced or be killed, was that day. Many Jews decided to flee, and the port was apparently so crowded in Spain that Columbus had to delay his voyage by a day. And that whether that's, I don't know, historically, I don't know, just even this idea of these ships, that moment when all of us, we're so incredibly traumatized and hurt and killed, and how many, all that came out of that moment. To me, in a sense, like the saddest day for all of us. One of the saddest days for all of us also shows us that when we take back the story and say, hey, that's the narrative, there's a different narrative that could be drawn from that, is a lot was stolen from all of us. And what was stolen from all of us has, in a way, a lot of shared traditions and overlaps and connections that weren't about trying to consolidate states or capitalism or other things, right? Or colonies. Like, we weren't doing that to each other for thousands of years. Not that humans were ever perfect beings or we weren't hurting each other in ways, but there was definitely a major project that happened in 1492, which had enormous consequences, right? Which we don't need to talk about here, for the world. And what does it look like to go back and say, wow, how are we all impacted by colonization? What was stolen from us all? How are we all impacted by the genocides that happened then? And not just what was stolen, but what we want to steal back. That's, to me, the more interesting question. So for me, I want to, steal back a sense of solidarity and communities without states, and a world without nation-state borders or essentialized identities. A world rich with, rituals and traditions and cultures, and, crossings over that the beauty of the seeding we do for each other in the diasporic sense of scattering all sorts of different things where we share and things. That's I just think that's a different story. So I think there's a lot of really good studies, like you were just pointing out your work. I'm just noticing a lot of also people are doing more like telling a different story of history, and history against the grain or history from below. But their story, I don't know, again, to come back to languages, you can say languages, the power of languages is who gets to tell the story and in what way. And I love storytelling when people are able to tell different stories, because wow, the damn narratives that we hear are so, again, hegemonic and flat, and they're intended to make us think the world is a certain way, to naturalize things that were never natural, right? Is Germany natural? No, right? But the origin stories, the narratives that get told, not just to single out Germany, France, we could take any place, right? Any nation state. And those stories kill us, when they become hegemonic and naturalized, and we have to tell. And it's also, I think, not just written languages, but the oral tradition has been stamped out and seen as not valid. And that's how people carried on these traditions of telling other stories. It was orally too, right? And the beauty of an oral tradition is it implies a social relationship. You have to have some connection to other people to tell those stories and to pass on those stories, right? It implies a fabric of communities and something that, I really think reclaiming our ability to tell our stories, and in all our different languages and voices and tongues and traditions, rituals and songs, is precisely a way. It is a tool against to dismantle states, borders, capitalism. Not the whole of it, but it's a pretty profound one. Denaturalizing. I mean, we look at the pandemic, and it's pretty remarkable right now. A lot of us joked during the pandemic, the first Pesach that happened. If you're familiar with that holiday, we sort of revisit that time of like wandering toward freedom and what that means. And we talk about liberation a lot, liberation for whom, and we're supposed to invite the stranger in. That's very prominent in Judaism, and so we talk about like why we have solidarity for people who aren't us. And it's a very beautiful holiday to revisit it. But this year, you also revisit a time when Jews were trying to resist, and they were, for a bunch of things were thrown at them to help just quell their resistance. And one of them was plagues. And so that the first year of the pandemic, I remember all of us reading it and both kind of crying and laughing and, going, wow, okay, we're in this other moment of a plague being thrown at us, to destroy us. But so many, the plague I don't want to minimize how it's brutal still, right? It is a collective trauma, and so many people have died and become ill in so many other ways. People have, it's such a painful moment. But it also shattered a bunch of narratives, like you have to go to work, or you have to, you can't care for other, it's shattering those narratives. And I think we're just beginning to see how people are saying, no, my life has meaning. I don't want to trade my life for capitalism. I don't know where it's going to go, but there's a profound shift going on where people are, beginning to throw off the stories of what states and capitalism have told us they need to do to survive, and are going, hey, you actually are trying to kill us. We need to look at different stories. And, yeah. So I think I think that's a reason also I've been watching a really big rise in, not just Jewish anarchism, but indigenous anarchism and Black anarchism and queer anarchism and brown anarchism. And I think it's not because these things are somehow an add-on to anarchism. And I just use anarchism because that's the world I care about and familiar with, in a sense of like, I understand it's a tradition that says we can self-govern and self-determine and be whole. But I think it's no accident, because a lot of us are going back to all the things that were stolen from us and saying, hey, within the Black tradition, there's so much beauty that's been about creating life. And within, Muslim anarchists, there's so much beauty that's been about life, and and we're trying to reclaim those life-giving impulses. And Judaism, like one of the highest values, which actually it is often in tension with other values within Judaism, is you're supposed to preserve life. And so there's all these different debates about, sometimes that's in, hey, you're supposed to have a day of fasting, but if someone can't fast because they'll, get really sick or die, you have to break that rule because life is more important, and those, when we go back and look at those things, you can say, oh, okay, that's a religious thing. That's maybe I'm not religious, but damn it, like all of us now have to be in the service of life in whatever way we get there against this death machine. And we look at those traditions and say, yeah, what if we actually were constantly saying, what is more important? Fasting for a day, for a holiday, or preserving someone's life? What is more important? Going to work in some crappy job, or figuring out a way we can support each other materially and emotionally and not have people die because they need to figure out a way to feed themselves or house themselves? Their life is more important than some, it's a really profound moment. And part of that's, denaturalizing stories.
Yeah. And one of the the story of 1492, there's just so much happened that year. I won't dwell too much on it because you already spoke about it. But one thing that I do know, for example, of Christopher Columbus, is that he supposedly was there. I forgot what it was specifically, but there was a procession sometime after the fall of Granada, which was like the final victory for Ferdinand and Isabel. And he supposedly was there, like in the crowd, like, celebrating and all that. And we know that he was there, or that he says he was there, because he mentions that in a letter to the king as part of I forgot the details, but like one of the letters that he had sent to him, telling him like, basically, I need money to do this expedition of mine. And another thing that really struck me about 1492, and I would sort of ask you to talk a bit about, I believe it's pronounced Tisha B'av, because you mentioned specifically you're remembering 1492. But before doing that, if that's okay, I would mention a brief story of a language. Again, it's called, in English it's called Mozarabic, which in Arabic and in Hebrew it would actually be called Latin, so just Latin. And this was a language, kind of a lingua franca in parts of the Andalusian, in part of Andalusia, during the Arab period. And what's very interesting about that is that this is a language it's also an umbrella term, because obviously the further you go back, the less clear things get. But this is a language that, for example, those who didn't speak it would refer to it as Latinus, as in Latin. They would actually refer to it as Latin, but it wasn't really Latin. It was just one of the descendants of Latin. And you can imagine this language in the same way as you have like Spanish, Portuguese, French, and all of those other Latin languages descending from Latin. This is a language that could have also descended from Latin, but obviously it was, you might say, extinguished, because this was a language that was part, you might kind of picture it as part Arabic, part Latin, a bit of Hebrew here and there and so on, but it's probably more complicated. I don't speak it, I just know a bit of the history. And what's very interesting related to our story is that this, calling it, because the Arabs, when they would refer to this language, they would call it Latini, like they would refer to it as the Latin language. And it's that name that would survive in Ladino. So it's this name that would, in the same way as Ladino ended up becoming, well, this is the language of the Jews specifically, but also others who were in Spain and therefore speak a Latin language that was called Ladino. And you have all of those threads essentially which exist to this day, other than Ladino continuing to exist. The name, so it's not related directly, but the name also exists in another language called Ladin, which is still spoken today in the Alps of Italy. And you have all of those links, and that language, the one of the Alps, is linked to one of the minority language of Switzerland, which is Romansh. And you have all of those threads all over the place. But if you have this very, I don't know, normative, let's say, I don't know which term to use, but this, I would describe it as a very boring understanding of the history of Europe. Those don't fit. This is more like, well, the Islamic period or the Arabic and Islamic period, it's kind of like this was a period and then it was restored when it ended. That's hence in Spanish it's called a reconquista rather than a conquista. So a reconquest rather than a conquest, which is what it technically was. And so all of those threads for me just make it more interesting that if I think of Spain today and I have a bit of interest in Spanish history, it's very rare to have this understanding that Spain has this Islamic heritage and this Jewish heritage. You might hear a bit of lip service to it from time to time, but it's just not seen as important as, like, if you picture something super Spanish, other than Franco, which usually they don't want to think about it that way, it would be Don Quixote, for example, right? Cervantes, and the whole medieval Christianity and everything that comes after it. But that's just it is part of the story. I'm not going to deny that. Obviously, it's an important and very interesting part of the story, but it's just not the only part of the story. And not recognizing that there is this other part of the story, the Arabic, the Islamic part of the story, is a way of flattening out those differences. And for me, one of the precursors of what would later come, like the obsession with flattening and with erasing all of those differences, and there must be only one way of being Spanish, which obviously to this day is contested. You have, Andalusian and Catalan and Basque and all of those other identities coexisting, or sometimes not so much with the dominant Spanish identity. For me, it's one of the many precursors of what we would end up identifying as fascism in the 20th century under, obviously, Franco. But to go back to 1492, can you sort of talk about what what Tisha B'av is, and why did you, in the book, why did you mention Tisha B'av specifically of remembering 1492? And just quickly say, and the reason I'm asking is because it is, since we're talking about quote-unquote La Reconquista, the expulsion, the ethnic cleansing, all of those terms, it included, of course, Jews, but it was also of Muslims. So this is actually an Arabic speaker. So this is something that many people in the world today have in common, but it's very rarely, if ever, commemorated as a common event.
Yeah, no, which it should be commemorated as a common event. Jews, Muslims, Arabs, and it was also very racialized at that time period too. How Jews, Arabs, and Muslims were understood in terms of racial components. I think it's another one of those historical sorrows or coincidences that Tisha B'av is Jewish. There's Jewish holidays pretty much constantly. We have a lot of rituals and holidays, but I think in a beautiful way to make sense of the world continually. And there are several holidays related to, they ask us to mourn and to think about loss and grief. And I really appreciate it. But I'm sure this is true of every, again, flattening out of holidays to be just buy things, or something. But I mean, Jewish holiday space to me is different times when you think about forgiveness, or you think about, community, or you think about liberation. And a lot of them have themes that compel you to talk about and think about and reevaluate, and every year continually. So Tisha B'av is a major day of communal mourning, but it's the culmination of, there's 3 weeks of mourning, grieving up to that day, especially the 9 days right before it. And it culminates, it is considered one of the saddest days of the year, in a sense. So what you can do all sorts of rituals to intentionally think about loss and sorrow and grief and process it, which I think is important, right? We need a language for grief too, right? Because I do a lot of sort of grief work, and to my mind, we only grieve things we love, And so we have to hang on to and remember grief, right? In Judaism, we often say, may someone's memory be a blessing, right? You want to, memory is, even when it's painful, like that memory keeps that love alive. And so on Tisha B'av in 1492 was on that last day I was talking about when Jews were being expelled from Spain. So it just coincidentally fell on that last day. I don't know whether that was something that, was known by the people who decided that was the last day or not. But yeah, so it's just a coincidence, but how, this day ends up commemorating something that should not just be our sorrow, but as you said, a sorrow of so many other people. And I think grief is, again, another sort of way that we can share across our identities, none of which are stable or singular. In a sense, is like, we don't want that just to be a day of sort of Jews, but I brought that in because I think, grief is really important. And especially, maybe again, to come back to this idea of sort of language. And I think another reason why they're sort of uncovering all the differences that the ecosystems that people had in their cultures in the world before it was flattened out. When you're speaking, talking about flattening out, I was thinking, what a weird irony, because, we go back to 1492 or that time period a little before it, when so many people thought the earth was flat. And then part of this sort of quote unquote linear trajectory toward progress and enlightenment was making the world round. But in a sense, the capitalism, patriarchy, the state, all those things have, heteronormativity, those things have flattened the world out, right? And before, there was such an incredible ecosystem, a human ecosystem that mirrored the non-capitalist wealth of the ecosystems that, people lived in, where foods, everything was so specific and beautiful to place, and people, but there, I don't know, part of why we're in ecological time of disaster is you flatten out the world, you flatten out the ecosystem, you think you can, homogenize food and transport it around the world, when people used to have such a deep connection. And those connections meant that they had a lot of other connections across things in terms of grieving rituals, or eating rituals. So for me, part of that uncovering of like going back to moments like 1492 and uncovering, wow, it's also bound up into this grief ritual. And for me, that's been a profound uncovering in terms of like moving back toward my Judaism through my anarchism, is to say, wow, anarchism doesn't give me the tools to get through the whole of life. But when I look at Judaism, I go, wow, there is a really intricate structure for handling loss and grief, and profound. From the moment, let's just say someone dies, it could be grief of all types, but the moment someone dies, you're not supposed to leave the body alone. They're supposed to be surrounded by community. You're supposed to be in community with other people for 7 days. And in that community, cry and laugh and scream at each other, argue, cook, do whatever you do, but do it in community. You're supposed to, there's rituals of cleansing the body and talking to the body and sending it on its way with water. But that also has to involve a community of people doing that ritual. Those grief rituals then end up, being after that first week, they go on the first month, and then every other month, and then once a year, for the whole of the time that people are alive to remember that grief. And so, when we go back and say, hey, we come back to the flattening out of the world, and, how that has flattened out grief and loss too. Right now, someone dies. Okay, a few days later, you pay someone a bunch of money it's called a funeral home, and they take care of it for you. You don't ever have to actually, have community or have any relationship to the person that, you don't wrap the body, you don't do this, you don't do that. And then after a few days, the funeral is over and you go back to work and you forget about it. And you're supposed to not keep grieving, get over it. And we need to remember, right? We need to remember that 1492, the sorrow of it. And we need to remember the sorrow because we lost so much we loved. And we want to bring a lot of that back. And how do we do that? And so one of the ways I know I think in this book, for instance, on the cover, and it's mentioned in the book a few times, but the person who designed the book is an incredibly beautiful human being, and they design books for me as labors of love, which is what I do all the projects I do as too, not for money, for love, which don't get paid. And they were not Jewish, and so they were struggling over what image. And then we thought, I was like, hey, let's try the pomegranate. And they came up with this really very luscious, sensuous, beautiful cover of a pomegranate sliced open where you can see all the seeds of diaspora, but held together in this sort of whole. It both looks kind of like a heart, and it looks like diaspora, the pain and the beauty, the sweetness, the tartness, the softness, the hardness, all the kind of dilemmas that are bound up in diaspora. But the pomegranate itself is another beautiful thing that was a lot of the whole Mediterranean, or that region where pomegranates can be grown. It wasn't just a symbol. It was used by Jews a lot. And so part of using it was to reclaim symbols that weren't, like the Star of David has become so statist oriented, for instance. And the Star of David was actually picked up and popularized by the Nazis. And so is that a symbol necessarily, right? Is that what speaks to who we are? But so there's a lot of sort of going back to different symbols, as a different, like a symbolic language, and the pomegranate's one of them. And I was in, before the pandemic, in Hania, Greece. And I don't know, every time I've been in Greece, which I feel like I have a relationship with as a human being and an anarchist and a person, but I also have this bodily relationship. Every time I go there, I'm just like, I know, I feel like I'm from here. And so I really want to listen to that voice. And there's a synagogue, and a little teeny synagogue that was sort of rebuilt, that's in Hania on Crete. And the last time I was there, I visited it, and, it's like barely used. It's hardly, I was the only one there. It was very, really tiny space, and had been there for hundreds of years. And all the Jews were killed during fascism in Crete, despite the Greeks fighting so hard to protect them, harder than anyone else. But every single Jew was ultimately killed in that city, despite them trying so hard. And that little synagogue survives. And I was in there by myself, this teeny little space that's been, rebuilt. And there's pomegranate images. There's a whole bunch of different symbols that aren't just what you would think of as like Ashkenazi Jewish or, Eastern European Jewish. There's symbols. And that synagogue, I read the little history of it. It was a meeting point for Jews from all across, because Jews, people traveled. Humans have traveled. They've always traveled. And so for hundreds of years, Jews came from all different places to that synagogue. And it was this great, and you look at the symbols and you're like, wow, this is every culture in this one space, in the symbols. And there's the pomegranate, just long story short. But the pomegranate isn't just a symbol for Jews, right? It's a symbol used by other faiths, other cultures within that region and beyond, because it grew there, right? Because people ate it, used it in festivals and holidays, because it felt like it embodies and feels like and tastes like sort of the bittersweetness, beauty of life, right? And so I don't know, if we flatten out the world, pomegranates may go out of existence because they can't, so many fruits and symbols are gone because they've been erased. But we also erase the profound history of symbols having meaning to people in regions and across space, across, identities, etc. We didn't have borders, right? In the same way, we didn't have borders now that impose and say, no, if you're Jewish, you have to put a Star of David on the front. Why? Why? Why is that? Where does that come from? What is that speaking to? Nothing, right? It's speaking to something that was constructed often against us, right? How do we reclaim, even the symbolic language, which reconnects us to place and food and across cultures. So the Jews and Muslims, just to take those two, have had such a beautiful intertwined history for so much of the time period, which doesn't mean people didn't fight and argue and hurt each other. People do, right? But there was a profoundly different ability to share and cross-pollinate and, et cetera, than the story that has been told, contemporarily, which is, so a long-winded again way of getting things. And I guess before, I just want to touch on one other thing to tie this, then you had mentioned when you were kind of writing me about like the pomegranate symbol, which is why I brought it up, but you had mentioned like other symbols and you'd happen to mention the forget-me-not flower as a symbol, like of Armenian genocide. And I was like, wow, I didn't even know that when you sent me that ahead of time. And it just really felt really powerful to me when you wrote that, in a way where I'm almost tearing up now, on the second anniversary of the Tree of Life synagogue murders, anti-Semitic murders. I have a dear friend who worked there with kids and was in Pittsburgh a couple days before it happened, etc. And then came back to do a a grief ritual the next year. But on the second anniversary, I came back a second time to do it. And just my friend and I decided to do a grief ritual together. And we spent hours and hours in this beautiful wooded area doing all sorts of like my friend's really good at sort of making up queered versions of rituals. And we did a whole bunch, but one of which is my friend happened to bring forget-me-not seeds. And we did this beautiful ritual of like, ended up, writing down our losses and grief and burning the paper in a little fire and digging around where it burned and burying the ashes along with the forget-me-not seeds. And a few months later, those seeds came up in flowers. And and I don't know why my friend picked forget-me-nots. I hadn't even asked them, but I was just like, wow, like maybe there's a way in which our bodies and our minds, I don't know, I believe more and more, like there's a way in which these things carry on, right? There's some memory of like forget-me-nots aren't, maybe we were grieving the Armenian genocide too, and we didn't even know it at the time, right? It was, just so in a way where we come back to these beautiful different symbols that each other's used, we carry on each other's grief, even if we're not thoroughly consciously aware of it.
I tend to believe that as well. And the forget-me-not flower is this beautiful, beautiful flower, which I was in Yerevan as it happened for the centennial of the genocide in Armenia, and that symbol was a bit everywhere. And of course, the other main symbol, like there's this I don't know if you know it. There's a very amazing movie, like from the Soviet era. It's like a Soviet Armenian movie called The Color of Pomegranate. And
Wow.
Yeah, it's a beautiful, it's very weird film, like very art. Like experimental, I mean, like that kind of movie, but the colors that are used are very vivid, and it's just a very stunning film. And that's why, like, when I saw the pomegranate on the cover of the book, of course I thought of this, and I did an episode with Sophia Armen a couple of months ago or something. For those listening, that's episode 79, in which the cover of that episode is a forget-me-not flower with if I remember correctly. I mean, I designed it and I forgot. But like in the back, there's a forget-me-not flower, and in the background, if I remember correctly, there's a photo of her family in black and white from towns that are now in modern day Turkey, obviously pre-genocide. And so those symbolisms definitely run throughout all of this. And like kind of like as a final point before we kind of get into the book section, one thing that I remember, I re-listened to this interview that you did on the Final Straw podcast, which I highly recommend to people listening. I was myself a guest there with Leila Shami a couple of years ago to talk about like Lebanon and Syria and stuff. And I remember you mentioning this concept of like wrestling, right? Like wrestling with God, wrestling with difficult topics, wrestling with it's just this notion that instead of saying the sentence "I believe in God," it's more the sentence of "I wrestle with the notion of a God." Like that, it's like it's always a give or take in some sense. And I was curious if you can sort of link that to like kind of difficult topics that one of your chapters is Antisemitism Hurts. And I read this and I saw a lot of parallels to friends of mine, of course. And as a quick parenthesis, just because I forgot to mention it before, I did partake in a Pesach in 2016, I think. 2016 in London. It was in this small synagogue, and I think it was in East London. And what was really beautiful about that moment is that we got to read a number of texts in different languages. And a friend at the time, Daniel, his thing was languages, and so he was reading, and he speaks Yiddish, and he teaches Yiddish actually, and he was reading some of the texts in Yiddish and in Judeo-Arabic. He read in those two languages, and someone else read in Ladino, someone in English, and I myself read in Arabic. And it was just a very, very precious moment that hasn't been, in my case at least, hasn't been reproduced at another time, because soon after that time, the reality, I describe it as like the realities of borders and visas and all of that kind of settled in again, because I had to, the visa expired, and so I had to leave again and all of that, so I couldn't do it the year after. And so I just want, if you can talk a bit about just this concept of wrestling with something as difficult as anti-Semitism, which is both sometimes very visual, or in the sense that like it's a word or it's an attitude or it's an accusation or it's whatever, but more often than not it's even more insidious than that. It's just like tropes that we've taken for granted, like you mentioned the imagery of witches, for example, and stuff like that. Stuff that we've taken for granted, and I say we as mostly in the West because I live now in Europe, really taken for granted, and yet it, despite the fact that we take it for granted and we might think it's harmless, it really isn't, and it has all of those insidious effects. Yeah, I'll just shut up now. Can you talk?
No, it's
about
okay.
it?
Yeah. No, thank you for bringing up the wrestling. A friend of mine recently was telling me a story from Torah, Jewish literature, or whatever, that we are God wrestling people because there's a story where like God comes to someone and wants them to do something, and the person starts arguing with God, and then God changes their name to the God wrestling people. And he goes, the moral of the story is, whether you believe in God or not, is we're willing to even argue with God. So I was like, so there's this profound like anti-authoritarian traits. It's no accident that so many Jews have become radicals, right? Because we're told to like argue with the authorities. Don't just take what they say. So that's so fundamental to Judaism. But that also is the anti-Semitic trope, right? The long anti-Semitic trope is Jews are either like radicals, the outside, like the outside agitator phrase, which often in the U.S. context gets applied, now to all sorts of other people, often Black people. The outside agitator, first, as far as I'm understanding it, was applied to Jews because they were not part of any nation states. They were all seen as having their own nation. So on the one hand, we're like the radicals, the subversives, trying to overthrow everything. And on the other hand, Jews were also seen as the people behind the scenes, controlling everything, the capital, right? Because Jews, historically, for a variety of reasons, had to, never were able to really be part of the body politic or the economic world, and had to do all sorts of sort of middle positions. And, to be, some Jews did crap. We all did crappy things, right? I'm not trying to say Jews are great. So anyway, we all done crappy things, but right, fun. But the stereotype that somehow Jews are this shadowy people behind the scenes. So those two things play out in so many different ways, right? And, then they end up becoming like stereotypes. I mean, the witches thing, that when you look at witches now, I like witches. So it's hard, the stereotype of witch with a big hook nose, which is such a Jewish stereotype. That's where that came from. Or the hats were something Jews were forced to wear to identify them, those pointy black hats. So some things get lost to history like that. Other things, just tropes that play out again and again and again. And so, why is that? Why is it that anti-Blackness plays out again and again, or Islamophobia or anti-Muslim plays out again and again? I think different things have different roles to play, right? And so it's helpful to those in power to have this group that you can blame, we're not the ones doing it. It's those people behind the scenes, and, so we could flash forward to the present day. You have things like, QAnon in the US context, or fascists, where, they often will, one of the tropes that links anti-Semitism to anti-Blackness, for instance, is, there'll be gigantic, beautiful uprisings against police in the United States. Really powerful 2 summers ago, right? Calling into question the need for police. And so many of the tropes became, there were, outside agitators, but it became really specific to the US context. Black people would not be rising up unless there was someone behind the scenes pulling the strings to help them figure out how to do that. So it both was anti-Semitic and anti-Black at the same time, right? All to say is, like, anti-Semitism hurts me. It hurts a lot of people. It hurts people who aren't Jewish. And that's why we need to understand it as much as we need to understand any other similar logic that's both, anti-Semitism is complex because it can be seen as it's often bound up with a racializing racism. It's often bound up with sort of anti-capitalist. But it plays a role in terms of maintaining power, right? That's why it keeps going on. It buttresses fascism. Why? Yeah. So I don't know. It hurts on the level of, right now for me, I just like everywhere I turn with, images of what U.S. fascists are using in their language, in their symbols. The January 6th Capitol thing almost a year or so ago, when they were wearing Camp Auschwitz t-shirts. They had symbols that would hurt a lot of people, right? Again, racist symbols, anti-Black symbols, and anti-Semitic symbols. And yet what happens again and again and again, and this is where the hurt to me comes in, and I was trying to get at, is it's in your face that they're talking about Jews too, or talking about anti-Semitism, and yet people don't even see it. And I think because so many people, it's so insidious. I've had way too many people in anarchist and leftist circles, somehow also think that Jews have a lot of power or take up too much room, or, have it good, so we don't need to, worry about them. And meanwhile, anti-Semitism is like right in front of their face. So yeah, it's a painful, like for many people, it's a painful thing when other people don't see and acknowledge your hurt. And I think at this moment, why it's been especially painful is like there's this been real beautiful awakening of people saying, hey, can't you see how anti-indigeneity has hurt us? And a lot of people go, whoa, I haven't, but yes, I'm willing to now. Or how, how anti-immigrant has hurt us, or how anti-Blackness or anti-Asian. And it's been profoundly, anti-Semitism is still really resistant to having people see it or even name it or even support people when they're feeling their own traumas around it. I was struck by that again really recently, a week and a half ago, when, on Shabbat in Texas, a person went into a synagogue, and the reason they went there was because they thought Jews control things, and they thought if they went to a synagogue, the Jews could fix things for them. Really insidious, right? Really insidious how these things play out. It was thoroughly anti-Semitic, but the cops, the FBI, the media, non-Jewish friends of mine, I got support from Jewish anarchists. I did not, it's who thought to mention that it was completely an anti-Semitic moment, and all the Jews, a lot of, in my circles, we were also saying, oh, this is a really horrible moment because there's going to be a bunch of anti-Muslim and Islamophobia connected to it too. And we have to speak out about both. And I saw Jews doing that, and I saw Muslims doing that, but I did not see, And so it's painful, because it's not just painful because it hurts me personally or other Jews personally. It's painful because people get hurt and killed because of it. And because historically, when we've been hurt and killed in the past, people have abandoned us, right? And that trauma from the past resonates in the present. And so, I guess it's just a plea why I wrote that piece, was to try to get across some of the same pain. It's like, I want to know your pain too when it's directed towards you, and I want you to name and know mine, because when the fascists write down who they want to come and kill, they have all our names on it, and we need to be there with each other, So I just want to maybe end on this little, I know I'm rambling, I could say so much about anti-Semitism, but that moment a week ago on Shabbat, it was so, all of us who are my Jewish friends of us, we all have the same impulse when we hear those stories, is we want to just run somewhere. I don't know where, because we know there isn't any safety, but mostly we know we need to turn to each other to care for each other. But it's like a visceral fear. And we have the same thing as damn it, we want to be able to be Jewish, and we want to be able to be Jewish visibly and proudly and in liberatory ways. And for my Jewish friends and I, we create spaces in public parks and public places, and we are visible, bring our identities to public places. We want to be able to do that and not have a fear of being murdered. Right? And it isn't just a false fear, right? It's how do you balance, how do we are in solidarity for each other so we can all be fully who we want to be? We can be those whole people and not have to fear. And ultimately, in that story of a week ago, what I wanted to point out is the rabbi, I don't know this person, right? I just read stories about them. He had a deep interconnections in his community with the Muslim community. And I kept reading stories of him in the Muslim faith-based community. And they were all like, we're family to each other. There was such a beautiful interconnection. And when it happened and the hostage was happening, the Muslim community was so there for them as family, And after, it was what saved those hostages was the rabbi picked up a chair and threw it at the guy with the gun and got out and into safety. And I think it's that story was getting lost too. It's anti-Semitism portrays us as we don't have power to care for others. We don't have power to outside of ourselves, which we do. And we don't have agency to care to resist and take care of ourselves, we're not just victims, right? We're able to take care of ourselves and each other. And that's always who has. We don't need police. We don't need states. We don't need, right? I don't care if the FBI says it was an anti-Semitic attack or not. That isn't the point. The point is that it was so unacknowledged. But I think the beautiful part of that story is like, it's this moment where it shows that people can take care of each other, and we can figure out ways to get out of situations like that with our own forms of community self-defense, our own forms of solidarity and collective care. But damn it, we shouldn't have to have moments like that. None of us should have to have moments like that. So yeah, it hurts. It hurts when people aren't willing to name anti-Semitism like they name all the other, and I know that happens a lot with anti-Muslim and Islamophobia and anti-Asian. I think there's some unfortunately categories of hate and brutality and genocide that for some reason just historically, don't get their due in this way. I'm language is failing me here. Sorry.
I understand what you mean.
Yeah. It isn't just that it hurts, it kills when people don't, because if we don't notice it, we're like, who cares if fascists are targeting Jews again and again and again, when they turn their gun, like we should care when they we should care when they walk into a black church, when they walk into a massage parlor, staffed by mostly Chinese people, or, we should care when they walk into a mosque. We should care, a synagogue. We're all in this together, right? We know that. Again, it's the thing we've been talking about this whole time is like, they want us to think we have this like historical antagonisms toward each other, but it's the state and capital and fascism that has created and exacerbate and are the largest perpetrators of antagonism toward us. We need to find this out. We need to all be together in this.
Yeah. I don't know what to say. I completely agree, of course.
No, it's so painful. I don't know, just aside, it's just like January 6th. It was like, I viscerally ran to the door, and I was like, I got to get out of it. And I was like, I had this thing, I thought, not the fascist Nazis were going to walk in, and I in my mind, I'm like, this is not true. This is not happening. And I was like, but there's, like, okay, it's, you get, whatever, we get traumatized by borders and fascism, and it's not for no reason, our bodies, we get to those places and we're like, damn it, but God, it's so painful right now. I can't even believe how Nazism seems to have been completely decoupled from its history of where Nazis were and who they were killing. Roma, Jews, whoever, there was a bunch of people Nazis were targeting, but anti-Semitism with or without Jews was central to Nazism. You can't, but now it's been like, as if it's not even, being in the so-called United, it's been mind-boggling to me. Like, how can we speak about Nazism and not talk about anti-Semitism? Like, that is core to its, it's core to its own self-understanding. Even if there weren't any Jews, once they got rid of all the Jews, they would still have been anti-Semitic because it is a good story. It's a good story for them to uphold fascism. Anyway, sorry, I'll stop.
No, obviously I completely agree.
It's just painful.
Yeah. It's just one of those things. I don't know. I kind of also words fail me, basically. There's also this episode with Daniel Randall, I don't know, a few months ago as well, and it was specifically on anti-Semitism on the left.
I'll listen to that. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Because I mean, there is obviously anti-Semitism is mostly present on the far right, obviously, and this where it's kind of manifested, especially historically, as the worst thing, but still. It is, as I mentioned before, like it's this insidious thing that is often like there are, long story short, because that episode was long enough as well, but it's there is such a thing as structural anti-Semitism, and it's something that like there are philosophers like Moshe Postone, who's this person, like he's Jewish.
Oh yeah, I know him.
Yeah, he died some years ago. Mentioning all of that. So anyway, like I won't get into it too much because of that, but
but it's even when it's not like explicit anti-Semitism, I was part of the Occupy, badly named Occupy movement in the United States, and oh my God, the whole thing was structured around like there's a small group of financiers behind the scenes pulling the string. I was like, who are they talking about? The Jews, and then I was targeted at the Occupy I was at as both a Jew and an anarchist. I'm like, okay, whatever. Did anyone get, like, my anarchist friends defended me, but I don't think anyone understood the anti-Semitic part of it. For me, I was like, oh, that stupid phrase, the 1%, like that became the Jews, a stand-in, and unfortunately, a lot of the Occupy, unfortunately, there were a lot of disaffected, like white guys with guns at the Occupy I was at, who, I tried to sympathize with and tried to be, there was a huge amount of people, Occupy, every type of person. They were part of the 99% supposedly, but I bet all of them are right now on the, like white evangelical Christian sort of fascists, and, because their whole thing was, there's a small group, whatever, we don't need to go, but, their lives were being, instead of them saying, hey, maybe white patriarchal supremacy and Christian aren't actually, maybe I should be humble and look at that, but no, instead, I'm sure most of them moved toward fascism, but because no one actually challenged that notion, So that's why it's important to understand anti-Semitism. Like if we'd actually been more aware of that movement could have politicized people in a different direction, and been much stronger than leading toward, it's not a direct line, but I think Occupy helped to lead toward this understanding that there's, conspiracy theory thinking, which often is structured around anti-Semitism too.
Yeah, I just remember Daniel said something along the lines of the guest, the term anti-Semitic conspiracy theory can be a tautology because it's a repetition. Like anti-Semitism is a conspiracy theory. It functions on this model of a conspiracy theory. Yeah, he has an entire book that came out on this topic last year, if I'm mistaken.
Wow. Oh, thanks. I'll look at it. Yeah. Wow.
Well, speaking of books.
Okay, books.
What are 3 books that you would recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, thanks for asking this question. I'm always bad, like, what are the 3 favorite? But I'll say, I think in the pandemic time period, I realized I was having such trouble reading. And then my dear friends at Firestorm Books, which also is the same town where The Final Straw is out of, there's a really incredibly beautiful anarchist ecosystem there. Started recommending speculative fiction to me. And I think in this time period, it's so dystopic. Reading speculative fiction is a gentle, beautiful way. So I'll recommend 3 speculative fiction books. One is The Unkindness of Ghosts by Rivers Solomon, who has many identities, one of which is Jewish, but I didn't know that at the time. But if you're interested in diaspora, it brings together trauma and diaspora really profoundly. Another one is called The 4 Profound Weaves by R.B. Lemberg, which is which I found out after reading it, another diasporic, a Jew. So there's all themes of the diaspora in that too, as well, and trauma. And the last one is Pet, P-E-T, and I'm going to have such trouble pronouncing his name. Awaki Iemza, I think. E-M-E-Z-I is the last name. Mm-hmm. And I want to just say all 3 of these books, I mean, they're so beautiful, like grasping with like sort of politics, but light-handedly, and they're queer. They're in the best of way, like troubling, beautiful border crossings. But all of them are absurdly beautiful in terms of the craft of their language and their use of words. And to come to our theme today, they are just incredibly gorgeous pieces of literature, and they have stories that you just cannot put down. And they hold the complexity of what we've talked about this whole time of trying to be whole and not forgetting that we've got all these broken parts in us, because when we forget, I mean, that's sort of, I won't give away what Pet talks about, but it's sort of set in the beginnings of a world where people want to not tell their children that there were harms in the world beforehand, as if you can shield people from the brokenness and it won't ever come back again. And so a little kid in this book goes on a quest to understand what that brokenness might have been. Yeah. And comes to a much more holistic understanding at the end. So they all sort of tie into what we've been talking, but they're all just so pleasurable and help you build a world outside of this one that's really hard right now, to let our bodies have a little bit of rest, because you get caught up in the story and the beauty of the language. But they also really speak to this moment right now and help us get through it better.
It's amazing. I'll get all 3 of them.
Yeah, they're actually incredible. So I I'm reading all the rest of the stuff by all 3 of them. They're all incredible.
All right. Well, Cindy, thanks a lot for your time. This was really, really fantastic. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, me too. It's such I'm like, when I was like, oh my God, I wish we could sit down in person and talk. I feel like I'd love to spend hours with you talking now. Yeah. It's so, But anyway, damn borders and pandemics, and hopefully someday I'll be in the same place at the same time. But I'm so, really appreciate, I just would love to talk to you more. I just really appreciate your
Same here.
your mind. So, and who you are as a person that I'm getting to know. So thanks so much. It's such a joy. I really mean that. I'm not just saying that. I don't just say things to say them. If you can't. But it was such a beautiful pleasure talking to you.